You are listening to a free preview. For full episode visit the Granite Mountain Substack and become a member of the Premium XL Prestige Sigma bonus stream.
Hi, welcome. This is the Granite Mountain Movie Club. Today we are talking about Annihilation, the Alex Garland film from, I believe, 2018. Last week we talked about Ex Machina with Astral, and this is totally coincidence. I did not plan to be talking about like all the Alex Garland films or anything, but here we are. And I've got Degree Studies here with us.
Hey, how's it going?
And I've got Cool Frazier.
Cool and listening.
And then we have a very special guest, first-time guest, Giant Geo. You might know him as Giant Geo or Geo Pennacchietti. Geo,
oh, yeah.
How you doing?
Good, man. Good. Yeah. We could have talked about this or 28 Days Later because, I was a huge 28 Days Later fan when I was a kid. Apparently they're making a new one, but I think Alex Garland is tapping out of that one. I think it's just Danny Boyle that's making 28 Years Later.
Yeah.
And I saw the movie some movie stills they released for it, and they have this Nordic twink that's like a UN soldier. So we'll see what happens. It's they might as well just get Gunther Fehlinger to administer the post-apocalyptic European world order. Apollo commands it. But anyways,
I asked Grok. You guys know Grok, the Elon's version of ChatGPT or whatever. I asked Grok to write an intro for Geo, and it's a little long, so I can't read the whole thing. But maybe there's some things in here. I sort of know these references, Geo, but you might have to explain them a bit because it goes into your account and it sort of takes things you're known for. It seems to think you're really concerned with forehead sizes.
That are you confusing with my good friend Fentanyl Blow Dart?
No, I entered your name in Grok.
The long forehead is an aristocratic trait on women.
Yeah.
So yeah.
He said,
Not the forehead docs my GF, but Yeah.
It says
is this a Natalie Portman commentary?
It says he's the guy who looks at a motivational poster and sees not just words, but the very essence of millennial angst. His posts are where highbrow meets lowbrow in a chaotic dance of wit and wisdom. And then it says something, it's you think he's about to get profound, and then he throws a curveball about forehead sizes and the surreal nature of globalization. Does that?
Yeah.
That
well, Gio, I don't mean to blow you up, but if I was gonna, I'm a student of the school of Fentanyl Blow Dart, and if I was gonna, track, I have a spreadsheet of the accounts that are most enthusiastic and unenthusiastic about Fentanyl Blow Dart forehead posting. And I think you and Mr. Polemical are two of the most positive responders. So I consider you part of the big forehead mafia.
Yeah. Well, it's all part of Lansharkian male feminism. That's really we're all me, Renault Fault, Landshark, Fentanyl. We're leading the way in an alternative view of the elegance of women as different body types than just the usual, aesthetic poster model, Geo Scotty, unattainable. So I think, there's definitely, and of course, the analog to that would be the sort of New York scene, dime square, coquettish, lathe, eating disorder, e-girl aesthetic. That is good. The average Red Scare listener, woman, femcel.
Is that Emma Emhoff? Is she one of those?
She's the DSA leftist version of that. I don't think. I think she would have been listening to Red Scare in maybe 2018 rather than 2024. Put it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this
Little
Grok
Bushwick.
thing.
I think don't they call her Little Bushwick?
This Grok thing goes on to say that you are a critic of the mundane and the man who might just convince you that the coal mines of discourse are indeed run by those with the most expansive foreheads.
Oh, yes, it's very true. True. I mean, there really is something to the forehead thing, but Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, I don't know. I have been posting Cole lately. I want to get back to art posting, but it's just like, this is the election season, and it's the tradition in Canada to know more about American politics than in Canada, and so yeah, I mean,
Yeah, just like many of Americans' great like comedians, like Norm Macdonald, or like
yeah,
half the SNL cast. Just like many of our great comedians are Canadian. A lot of the biggest like commentators on Twitter of American politics are Canadian.
that's
Lots of
very
Canadian.
true. Yeah, I mean, well, because anyone with any talent, they go into the American market.
Yeah.
It's like all like most NHL teams in America are basically just Canadians. So, But no, that is true. There is a like there was this article, was it the Daily Beast, where they're like a disproportionate amount of people on the online right are Canadian. And I think it's maybe because like we avoid it because politics is just so closed. It's such a closed market here in Canada that it's like, well, America is always this like, and like normie conservatards in Canada do this, like America's like this outlet of baseness, if you will. And
Yeah.
that's like why we do it. Yeah,
Yeah,
but
that makes sense. Well, at any rate, we're glad to have you here. And also I will say one thing. So you're a big account. You're a name brand. Lots of
am
people know who
I?
you. I mean, in my estimation, yeah.
I still post. Like I only have no. I'm kidding. I mean, I like to think. I don't know. I mean, maybe it's imposter syndrome, or maybe it's just like some kind of shameless egoism, where like I'm not as big as Lomet. I'm not as big as Bronze Privet. I'm not as big as Keith Woods. I'm not as big as such and such. I don't know. Anyways,
Well,
go
and
ahead.
once you get
Keith Woods is 6'9". I mean, nobody's as big as Keith Woods.
True.
Well, I was going to say though that from my perspective, you're a big account, and I DM people about coming on the show, and oftentimes I don't hear back, or I get sort of the runaround.
Why would they want to come on this Outlaw Mud show? No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, but you
I'm
responded.
kidding, man.
You responded right away, and you were gracious and nice, and said, "Yeah, let's do it." So
I've been on.
No,
very
but
small
Gio, whenever I'm at like a fake Mexican restaurant in Southern Virginia that's like it's pretending to be Mexican, but actually it's El Salvadorian, and I have two 22-ounce Dos Equis, and I wait till it closes, and then the fat waitress is asking me if I need anything, and I say, "Hey, what are you doing after this? How many kids do you have?" She always asks me, "Do you actually know Gio Pennacchietti, or do you just follow him on Twitter?" And then I say he agreed to be on my podcast once, but then we lost touch. And then she says, maybe you should just get an Uber.
That's like one time I was with my poli-sci supervisor, my MA, and I think he like in a hushed breath mentioned Nick Land. And I'm like, well, I'm mutuals with Nick Land on Twitter. I have friends that know him, and he just like went quiet for like a minute. And I'm this was like back, I think, during the Gamergate days. But anyways, apparently it's a 10-year anniversary of Gamergate, so shout out to Gamergate. It's gonna be, and August 28th, Master Milo going on the kill streak. No, sorry, I'm not gonna do drama. Not gonna do August 28th. But
See, no, I'm worried right now, Gio, that there are some Granite listeners who don't know who Ethan Ralph is and don't know what you're doing, but it's a very good impression.
Again, another thing I ripped off from PPP on Kino Casino. No, but yeah, so yeah, man. I mean, I go and like I'll go on any show. Like, granted, if it's like I don't know, like some shows I've been on that are kind of an optical. But if you have like an interesting concept, I'm always down to do something. So, and of course, like movie reviews are another good passion of mine too. So, yeah.
Well, yeah, thanks for joining. Let's jump into it.
Annihilation.
This is Mortal Kombat Annihilation, right?
Yeah. I'll jump right into it. I'll ask you guys about your history with the movie, and I'll go first. And so I had what I think was a very special experience with this movie because I went to go see it, and no one else really did. It didn't make any money, and I went with this one friend, and he wasn't into it at all. But we were sitting there watching it, and I thought it was pretty good. But the theater, I think probably because it was such an unpopular movie, like they hadn't, like if it was a more popular movie, they would have gotten complaints about the sound. But since no one else was going to see it, like at the earlier show times, they didn't know that the sound was way too high. And so the final like 20 minutes of the movie is this like wall of sound, really saturated noise. And in my theater, it was just way too loud. But I like that sort of stuff. I like bands and stuff that do that.
It was like going to a Swans concert.
Yeah. It reminded me of seeing Sigur Rós. I don't even know if that's the right way to say it, but
oh my god, you saw Sigur Rós?
Yeah, I saw them a few times, and yeah, they do that.
Gio knows how to say it the fancy way.
and yeah, so I'm really into that. So the end of this movie was just very powerful for me. I loved that whole like that overwhelming feeling, and I like the movie on its own, just in general. But that's sort of my introduction to it. I'm curious when you guys saw it and what you thought of it.
Yeah, I mean, I was a fan of Ex Machina, so I was like, "Oh, this Annihilation thing looks great." I'm all in on Natalie Portman. I'm like, "This sounds good," and weird alien stuff. That's like right up my alley. One of my favorite movies is Signs, so I was like, "Yes, let's get some weird alien stuff." But then I was like tracking as it was coming out, and I did notice like the weird way it was kind of just dumped. And I think it was kind of one of the first movies to just get dumped on streaming.
Yeah, like 2 weeks after the theatrical release, I think.
Yeah, and like that had never happened before. And like, so I actually didn't see it in theaters. I just, because I heard it was just going to Netflix in 2 weeks, and I'm like, I'll just watch it. But yeah.
Yeah, degree studies. Do you have a history with this?
Yeah, so I have a long and annoying answer. So I really like Gio. Maybe you have a response to this, but even though her politics are a little annoying, they're a little interesting. I like Margaret Atwood, the author of The Handmaid's Tale. I like her. I like her books, and she actually is kind of like an environmental weirdo in Canada. Like I think she has like some overlap with sort of Ted Kaczynski politics.
Or like David Suzuki here in Canada,
Yeah. And so she has this book, Oryx and Crake, which is kind of like a environmental catastrophe, post-apocalyptic book. And when the book Annihilation came out by Jeff Vandermeer in 2014, a bunch of reviewers said, this is like the Margaret Atwood book, Oryx and Crake. And I had loved that book. So I said, okay, I'm going to read this. And I read the book and really liked it. But it's a weird book. And I think what I liked most about it is it's one of those mystery books where none of the questions get answered. Like it starts with a weird, fantastical scenario. And as you read the book, like you get deeper and deeper into the fantastical scenario, but it's very obvious that it's going to end without giving you any answers. And I like that. And I actually remember when reading the book thinking this could never be a movie. And so 14 years later, I think the book came out in 2014 and the movie is 2018, if I'm correct. So I was very excited when I heard they were making a movie, and I had also seen Ex Machina and liked it, and I thought, okay, this guy could do a passable job. And as maybe we'll get into, the movie is quite different than the book, which I think is the only way you could sort of put some version of the story on film. But I think I either saw it in theaters or like immediately when it came out on streaming, and I do like it. I think I always like when directors sort of look at a confusing or weird book and are like, well, you can't put this exactly on screen, and so I'm going to do my own version of it, and I'm going to significantly change certain things about the characters and the plot, which is what I think happened between the book and the movie. But I think the movie ends up being pretty cool. Like it's, I know there's a lot of people who loved the book who are sort of mad in the ways that it departed from the book, but I don't know. I liked it a lot. I think mainly because I think it looks great. I think Area X, or as it's called in the movie, like the Shimmer, it has a really interesting and unique aesthetic, and I think I enjoyed looking at it the whole time. So even if you're not sure what's going on with the story, or it's like a little bizarre, everything you're looking at is very cool. And so I liked it a lot.
Isn't I remember my best friend in real life, like that was his favorite book he read in school, Oryx and Craig. Because of course, like here in Canada, we often read at least one Margaret Atwood book on school, and it was like he was like describing it to me, and I'm like, isn't that like that's like eugenicist NRX? Like it's like the Richard Hanania future. Like it's or should I say Richard Hosty, not Richard Hanania. It's like I'm like, wow, that's crazy. I can't believe Margaret Atwood wrote that book. But yeah, that's like
Well,
there's
it's
like
interesting. I think what I like about that older generation of environmentalist art is that like it has a hatred of humanity
yeah.
that it makes sense that people associate with the right. I think it's ultimately those authors would say, like both Vandermeer and Atwood consider themselves like on the left, but it sort of makes sense that certain right wing people would relate
Yeah.
to it because it's sort of a version of eugenics where it's like humans are bad and like Moss is good. So I hope Moss overtakes the whole planet and like kills every living thing.
Yeah, I was
It's very
gonna.
much like Derek Jensen, like what about blowing up a dam sort of deal for the salmon.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Gia, when did you see this? Like, is this? Did you go way back with this one? I mean, way back
No,
six years or whatever. But
I saw it like last year on Tubi, but I I didn't even know that Alex Garland directed it until I actually saw it, because I had been like such a big fan of 28 Days Later and other films that he did, and I recently watched what was the film called, Man? It was like
yeah,
the
men,
surreal, yeah,
men,
Men,
yeah,
yeah, which was like a surrealist sort of like body horror gender trope. But I watched it, I really liked it because I ever since I was a kid, and I guess you could classify 28 Days Later as that. I always loved films like the engagement of a small ragtag band of either military or something of that nature engaging with the unknown. And one of my favorite films when I was growing up, even though people hate 90s John Carpenter, was Ghosts of Mars. Because, like, because I like, grew up as a millennial chud, right? So it's like, like the thrash and new metal soundtrack and, Ice Cube and all the aliens look very like trippy, and it looked like it was like all of them were about to go to an Ozfest, right? So I always loved those films, and even like the more higher brow ones, which I guess we could talk about, such as Stalker. Um, like I always loved films of that engagement with the unknown, especially in a military context. And when I watched the film, I immediately loved the sort of the build up in the first few scenes, and it took it in a direction that sort of tripped off a lot of like theory cell wires, even though the initial grab for me was sort of like a military team engages with this unknown quantity in a base and they don't know what to do, and like that was really appealing to me. But then later on, when they were describing the actual engagement with the Shimmer, like that was like, it was like, man, this is like a really interesting movie. And I've been thinking about it ever since. And so I think that there's a lot of to me, it's not surprising that it was a box office bomb, because I think like, I mean, I'm a fan of very like drawn out and somewhat quiet dramas, but most people are not. Most people, if they see like, okay, military film going into the unknown, there needs to be like gun fu everywhere. There needs to be this. there needs to be a spectacle. There needs to be like what I guess Scorsese called the theme park.
Mhm.
So yeah, Annihilation definitely is not for mass appeal, but I can see why Alex Garland in particular probably took it up from the book because yeah.
I actually had a similar experience because the marketing, they kind of tried to make it seem like it was going to be this like military versus alien,
Yeah.
weird alien thing, and so that's what I was expecting watching it, and it's definitely a slow burn.
Like Predator, but girls.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
was like, oh, this
Yeah.
is going to be kind of fun maybe, and action packed, bigger budget than Ex Machina, more straight up sci-fi. And then it was just kind of like girls wandering around with some moss and some bears, and I was just like, okay. And then but yeah, I just rewatched it and I'm like, oh yeah, this is good.
the
But it was betrayed by the marketing, I think, a
Yeah, the
lot.
marketing was, well, sorry, my chair just like snapped. But the marketing was limited because I think one of the guys, you guys know who Larry Ellison is, the billionaire,
Yeah.
or
Oh yeah.
he's like given his kids a bunch of money and they became Hollywood producers. His son, David Ellison, I think was very skeptical. He had funded this or helped get the money together. He was very skeptical and he had wanted them to change a lot of it. He's like, you got to have a happier ending. You got to make Natalie Portman more likable. Like she's, you got to change the story a little bit. She can't be like this cheating whore or whatever. So, uh, so they didn't do that, right? The other producer stepped in and was like, no, back off. So I think there was a power struggle there, and I think he's like, well fine, but I don't want to put marketing money into this. So that's
Yeah.
what I kind of understand happened.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Hollywood killing
that's
creativity? No way. That never happens.
that's interesting because this is sort of I guess what I was trying to say earlier is this is the rare movie where like the plot of the book is very ambiguous and difficult to put on screen, but what they did honor is that like it's a sort of mysterious and not that likable main character, and it's a strange story. Like they changed the story beats, but they kept the spirit of it being a very challenging and ambiguous both character and narrative. And so I think that's why I sort of like the movie, because even if it's different like beat for beat from the book, they didn't make it they didn't turn it into just like sci-fi slop.
And
It's still weird and challenging. So
apparently
I
Garland, apparently he read the book once and then wrote the screenplay from memory. He didn't refer back to the book. He wanted it to be like, he wanted the experience of adapting it to be kind of hazy and dreamlike. So that explains, I think, some of the relationship to the book.
Yeah, I did. So they said that on the. I know I sent to you, Granted. There were some Ringer podcasts about this movie. I think the Andy Greenwald and Chris Ryan,
Yeah.
and they said that like he read a galley copy of the book and then wrote the script immediately, and that by the time he sent the script to Jeff Vandermeer, the author of the book, like the deal was already signed. So Vandermeer had no real like, but I wonder if that's a bit of a like romantic exaggeration, because I actually think or maybe Garland's just like a really smart guy, because I think there are a number of there's enough like thematic consistency and interesting things that do refer back to the book that it does seem to me like, even though it's quite different, that it does read like the person who wrote this script like really liked the book. So either he's just a very like there are even things that seem to refer to the second book. Like in the movie, I think Natalie Portman has a relationship with like a black guy she works with, and that actually happens in the second book in this series. And so I
Hmm.
wondered like, oh, did Garland actually read the whole series, which I think would have been out by 2018, but obviously that's not a part of the official story of like, oh, I just read it once and wrote this great movie, no big deal, I'm very talented. But
So I think it sounded like everyone sort of basically likes the movie. Is there any caveats there? You guys think it's good, but, or anything like that?
For me, it's just, I think the last 30 minutes is where it's at. Like, you need the rest of the movie to get there, but yeah, for me that's the payoff.
Mm-hmm.
I forget, how did Natalie Portman become the only survivor, and ever, like, she discovered that videotape where was it a phosphorus bomb or something like
Yeah,
that?
phosphorus grenade.
Yeah.
Yeah, so should we say what the story is?
Yeah,
For those at home?
Fraser,
Or I don't know.
you're a linear thinker. Explain what happens in this movie.
So the short version is there's a lady, she's lonely at home, and then a strange man shows up outside her room. Turns out it's her long lost husband, who she presumed dead in some kind of overseas war. He's a soldier. He starts wigging out. They call an ambulance. The ambulance is overtaken by a shady military group, and then it's revealed that he was the only survivor of this team that went into a alien Shimmer, which is a glowy veil surrounding a swamp. And then she gets recruited to go in with a team of women to the source of the Shimmer, which is a lighthouse. They make it there, and then an alien transforms into her, maybe?
Or takes on her shape, I believe. Yeah.
Yes, within the Shimmer, they start to experience
Spoiler
all
alert.
these. Yeah, they start to. Well, yeah, we do full spoilers, but within the Shimmer, they just start to experience all these abnormalities. Time
Yes.
seems to be moving differently.
Kind
Their
of time
compasses-
dilation, and then also
Physics. Yeah.
there's lots of like weird organic diseases and genetic mishaps that take place, and also a few scary monsters show up.
There's also weird fauna that changes the physics of basic plant and animal structures, if I recall. Yeah. So, like, there's sort of like what they interpret as sort of like genetic degradation, but actually it's like an alien imprinting of matter from the outside coming into our normal way of doing things like photosynthesis and basic biological processes. And so that's where like these monsters, and you get like a lot of shots of body horror and what happened to the team and so forth. I guess the only criticism is that what do they do? It's like they try to do like some girl boss script on top of it. Like, well, all the men died, all the real soldiers died. So it's like, might as well send in like a group of women. So
Yeah, and when I first saw the movie, I think I made up an explanation in my head for why they sent women, and then that explanation like stuck in my head up until recently when I rewatched it, because they don't actually explain it at all. But I thought,
Well,
or do they? Do they explain
well,
it?
part of the explanation is they all have some kind of terminal illness or trauma. That
Yeah, they're all
means
damaged. Yeah.
They basically are on a suicide mission, and so
yeah, they're expendable. Yeah.
So one lady is dying of cancer, one lady her husband died, one lady like something else, but they all have something deeply traumatic that they kind of are like ready to give away their lives. And they don't specifically say why it's only women, but it is.
In the book series, I don't think this is totally clear in the first book, but what becomes clear is that so they're the 12th mission into Area X, but what becomes clear in the second book is that there have actually been like 40 something missions.
Oh,
and that
what a body count, eh? Holy crap!
Yeah. What's the
totally.
Shimmer's body count?
That's like worse than the Zone, right? In Tarkovsky.
No, it's a real like Trudeau intervention style, But it's
they just have like a military made program, like who's the most suicidal or damaged. Like, here you go. You want to like go to... Might as well just like send them into the elephant foot and the base of Chernobyl.
Yeah, but in the books, what they say is that after like the first few dozen missions, everybody's dying, and then some, like as happens in the movie, like biological copies of the people that go in show up outside of Area X, but they're not the original copies. Like they have no memory of their life as humans. But it says that
they're soulless.
After the first few dozen missions, they start trying weird things about like the types of people they send in. And so the mission before the one that Natalie Portman goes on was all men, and that's the mission that her husband was on. And then they decide, because the mission with all men was unsuccessful, they send all women in. But that background is not covered in the first
Yeah,
book
I think
or the movie, but it's
that's only implied in the movie. Is like they're just kind of trying something.
And
yeah, yeah.
that's what I came up with in my head. In my head, I said, "Oh, they had to send women because, like, they found out like that the male genome responded poorly to the shimmer or something like that." Like, that's what I thought, and that's what I told myself, which would have been a good detail. They should have included
Yeah,
that.
and
But yeah,
another piece of background that I think is just interesting for people to know, because I've listened to all these Jeff Vandermeer interviews, and I think it just makes the movie cooler, is that he says the inspiration for this book is that there was some like global warming concern, like libtardism, but he lived in, I don't know if he still does, but he lived in the Everglades in Florida, and he says he was just walking around every day, plotting, you might say, like looking at like swamps and these weird environments, and he was sort of thinking to himself like, oh, if the whole world had the climate of like an Everglades swamp, like plants and animal life would be totally different than what they are on Earth. And so he sort of got the idea of like, well, what if the Everglades were like this invasive, expanding area that was making all other genetic life more like itself? And that was sort of like the inspiration for the story. And I find that like a very evocative and
Oh
cool
yeah.
inspiration.
Well, it's like literally the force of the outside coming into or enfolding into our own reality to where it can print its own DNA and its own sequence of various processes onto our reality. And I think like that's always the sort of like unexplained thing with a lot of body horror, with a lot of sci-fi, with that there is alien life is more of a contagion rather than something that is normally like sentient in the way that we think of it, but yet it's sentient nevertheless. And
Right. And I think part of the idea, I don't know if the science on this is strictly correct, but I think in like tropical environments, which the Everglades are, it's like evolution happens faster and more weirdly, but
yes,
it can't sort of expand beyond its environment. But so like very particular types of animals and plants develop in those hot and wet environments, but they can't spread out to like continent spanning life, because those environments are very specific. But so again, part of the idea was like, what if the sort of supercharged evolutionary environment of the tropical forest or tropical swamp was like also alien and could infect anything that came into it.
what would you guys say this is about? If you had a big brain take, like, is this about? I think a popular interpretation is it's about personal self destruction, but also, um, something like cancer, which destroys its host. Like, is this about the Earth getting cancer? I don't know. Do you guys have a big brain take? Like, what's this about?
Can I do the small brain take first?
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, I think the popular take on this is, yeah, definitely, like they kind of explicitly compare it to cancer, right? So
Yeah.
it's somewhat of a message on like, wow, cancer sucks, but um, also what I've heard as kind of the most popular interpretation is it's about trauma and how trauma changes you, and that so all the women have these heavy traumas, and then they go into the shimmer and they're changed physically by it, but and also the husband goes to war, comes back, and he's a different person, right? And then similarly, Natalie Portman kind of goes through this divorce or losing her husband. She goes through that trauma, and then she comes back a different person. Now in this case, it's the science fiction version, where she's literally an alien that morphed into her shape, but that's like the metaphor I guess they were getting at.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think I'm anti the trauma take, but I think there's, especially comparing the book to the movie, there's like a broader way to look at it, which is basically like the book cuts back and forth between a narrative of the biologist, the main character, the Natalie Portman character, before she goes in and after. And I think in part what it's trying to compare is like when she's outside of Area X, she's changing. Like there's things happening in her life that change her personality, but they're happening slowly enough that she can make sense of, like, she feels like she has a consistent identity, both biologically and psychologically. But then once she's inside Area X, she's changing so much that questions come up of like, well, if all the cells inside you are changing and your memories are changing, like, how are you even sure that you're the same person? And so I think the book is using that example of like, if you went into an environment where it was the same as life on Earth, but biologically and psychologically, your development was just moving much faster than it does in regular life, you would almost immediately feel like a completely different person. But that is sort of what life on Earth is like, just sped up. And so, what do we make of the fact that, like, our experiences and our exposure to things in the environment, other people, relationships, trauma, I guess, like, changes who we are, but we're supposed to think we have some psychological or biological continuity with our own past, even though we sort of know we don't. And so I think, because I'm offended by the idea that it's just about trauma, because trauma is such like a retard buzzword.
Ugh.
In
Yeah, and
And that's why I
every
said it's
horror
the small
movie,
brain take.
yeah, every
Men
horror
is
movie
more
became a
explicitly
trauma.
about female trauma. That's like way more male feminist of
No, but I think basically what I just said is just like a pretentious re-description of the trauma thesis. So I think that's an okay way to explain it. But I think it's sort of like, yeah, they're setting up like, what if the sci-fi premise is like, what if we create a zone on Earth where once you enter the zone, you change physically and psychologically the way a person would over the
yeah.
course of 10 years, but in a week. And what psychological effect would that have on the characters? And so that's a way of exploring, like, how do people
Yeah.
make sense of the trajectory of their own lives, given that you
Well,
can be such a different person after a bit of time.
well, it's fundamentally about displacement at the end of the day. There's this I read this like a while ago. There's this great essay, but the reason I read it is because it's more about visual art. There's this great essay by the accelerationist philosopher Amy Ireland, who recently wrote a book called Cute Acts, which, I mean, some Twitter transformers were taking umbrage with, whatever. But so Amy Ireland, in the same vein, I guess, as a lot of, like, Nick Land or Shenik, whatever how you pronounce his name. She's a very interesting philosopher. She wrote this essay called "The Infinite Sales Bay of the Universe," and it's about this visual artist who, what's his name, Andrzej Skufka, who created this installation called Black Market, where it's a series of these very shiny, voluminous tubes of rubber and black, like jet black tubing and so forth. That's sort of like to represent an alien entity that has sort of entered or enfolded into the outside. I just wanted to read you an excerpt from this essay where she mentions annihilation. So, one particular model from science fiction proposes an enthralling thesis. This is the zone trope, first innovated by Arcade and Boris Stugatsky in Roadside Picnic, which was the work that was based that then Tarkovsky based Stalker off of. Retransmitted by Andrei Tarkovsky and Stalker, John Harrison's Nova Swing, Jeff Vandermeer's Annihilation, and most recently Alex Garland's film of the same name. These works speculate upon the appearance of a sudden, monumental, unexplained disturbance in anthropomorphic space-time, known only for conceptuality. 2 is clearly unable to assimilate it as the zone, the event site, Arena X, or the Shimmer. Inside the zone, and sometimes fatal unpredictability reigns. Space and time no longer function following previously intelligible laws. Scale and perspective are impossible to achieve. Maps are made but rarely proven useful, if not downright deceptive. You're saying we're getting out by going deeper in, claims the site physicist in Garland's Annihilation. Roadside Picnic Zone seems invulnerable to entropy, while decay sets in unnervingly quickly in Vandermeer's Arena X. Compasses and watches are ineffectual. Gravity is fractious. Radio waves, light waves, and genetic information partake in the opaque commerce under a strange logic of transversal refraction. The environment changes suddenly and inexplicably, and cause-effect relationships are indecipherable if they ever apply at all. You can get change less order. You can't get change less ordered, remarks Oshman, a specialist detective in Saudet Site Crime Unit, to professional stalker and erstwhile site criminal Vic Storeton in Nova Swing. Okay, moving on. The zone doesn't give a damn at what the good guys and the bad guys are. Like its physics, moral values, and the zone isn't party to any human order. In each of these texts, traffic into and out of the zone is monitored, policed, and incompetently regulated by a local military apparatus. Its primary target are the stalkers, social outcasts of some kind or another, who harbor an enigmatic attraction to the arena. Risking their lives every time they cross the border, the stalker survives by smuggling unintelligible artifacts back to the ordinary world and selling them to dealers in contraband. In Vandermeer's and Garland's Annihilation, the figure of the stalker is replaced by the participants of a series of secretive experimental military expeditions. Men and women deployed into the zone by dysfunctional and authoritarian martial organization known as the Southern Reach. So why go there at all? What is shared by all the figures who find themselves drawn to the zone or Shimmer? The stalkers, the soldiers, the extendists, the travel agents, is a desire to exit the known. They're searching for the very thing that breaks up habit. An indefinable dissolution synonymous with loss of things that sustains human habit, the self. Memory ceases to function and names evaporate in the zone. Those who enter it end up becoming something else, subject to invasion by exterior forces. It tries to colonize you. You want to know what it's like in there. It's disruption of the world, the apparatus of authority. And so, yeah, basically there is a lot of crossover with the more like recent trends in experimental philosophy, let's say. And there's a lot of crossover with the sort of idea of what does it mean to truly disrupt the self on a fundamental level, and the fact that the self can be copied, albeit in an emptied form. That is also a fundamental ontological break with the subject, because if there's a doubling or a copying, then there's something that it's implied that the self can be somewhat transparent. And so I think like there's this weirdo there's this weirdo evocative nature that compels you to certain regions of indeterminability. And I think that's fundamentally a major sci-fi trope for a reason. Although the problem is that, you know, the philosophic implications get papered over by nerd culture and tropes and a lot of like Reddit nonsense. But a film like Annihilation really does like entertain those philosophic boundaries of knowing. And I think that's why it's so provocative in a way.
Well, Gio, this Amy Ireland person sounds pretty smart, but I'm more of a Kathy Ireland guy. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, man.
Yeah, I while you were reading examples of this concept, I was thinking of The Keep by Michael Mann. It's because it's a cave, but it's like a zone, and instead of like aliens, it's like old Kabbalistic demons or something. And then also Shyamalan's The Beach That Makes You Old movie.
So is that the same? No, that's a different beach. Garland wrote a beach movie, but that was the Leo one.
That was, The Beach, where there was like a video game. That was great though, because
Yeah.
that soundtrack was amazing. It had Moby's Porcelain in it. Although Moby's like a total libtard, but like that's besides the point. He's like,
granted, have you done The Beach? Because I think of that as that movie really inspires strong reactionary things in me, because it is a great movie, but it's so retarded where it's just like they go to this party, they all cheat on and ultimately murder each other, and then the movie ends with him like looking at a picture of all of them and being like, but it was a really great party. And then happy music plays, and it's like, what the fuck is this movie?
No, I haven't seen The Beach since it came out, so I'd have to revisit
no,
it.
the Beach is profound, because do you remember the shark bite guy where he's slowly dying? And Leo DiCaprio says, like, you know, it's like you mourn people that die, you enjoy people when they're alive, but it's in between life and death where people are the most disturbed, and sort of like harshing the vibe, and it's destroying their party atmosphere. That was like one profound moment of the movie, but it was like there was a lot of like retarded elements as well. Yeah.
No, it's an important scene because, after I saw that, I always kill the person who's having the least good time at any big, like orgy or rave that I'm at.
Is Tilda Swinton a wood? Or
not for me.
Of course.
No.
Granite's lying.
Degree Studies, you mentioned towards the beginning about certain strange of like environmentalist thought where they like demote the importance of the human, and they say like any living thing or whatever is just as important as any other living thing. And there's some of that in this movie. Well, I'm not saying that the movie really necessarily endorses that, but what's her name? The Lena, the main character, Natalie Portman. I mean, she says like, oh well, it doesn't want anything; it just wants to grow, and like it doesn't. It's
like the Indian subcontinent.
Yes. Yeah, she even says
everything it touches.
She says it
yeast life. The zone is full of yeast life.
Full of yeast. Yeah.
She says it wasn't destroying; it was changing, making something new. Like, I don't think Garland was advancing this idea, but was he? Is like that a point of view he thinks he might be thinking is valid?
So this is interesting. I think there is an environmentalist idea, or it's not like a mainstream environmentalist idea, but there's sort of an idea that is environmentalist adjacent that I take somewhat seriously, that is like, the point of life is to evolve and survive. And if there is some organism that evolves and survives more effectively than, advanced mammals, but doesn't have what we call consciousness, then like that doesn't matter, because there is a certain scientific perspective that like consciousness is totally incidental to the nature of life. Like it's this weird emergent delusion that some mammals and humans in particular think they possess, but that, and obviously like all religious traditions say that consciousness is super important and separates humankind from all other animals, and it's like this very significant development. But there is a certain biological or scientific perspective that says, no, consciousness isn't even real. It's a thing that humans think they have, and different mammals, apes, dolphins, whales may have some version of it, but it's not important. And literally, if there is like
Chamberlains,
if there is a disease that like kills you and takes over your body and turns you into a zombie, but it is like more efficient at propagating itself, then that would be like a higher form of life. And that is, I don't know if I can say what Garland or Vandermeer's perspective on that question is. I will say in the book, there are clear instances where there are things within Area X that are becoming conscious in a human way. Like in the first book, the biologist, Natalie Portman's character, sees a dolphin that she says has extremely human eyes, and she actually thinks that that might be her husband. And then in the later books, she meets an owl who is her husband, and like the owl does weird things that indicate to her that it has like a higher consciousness. So at least in the books, there kind of is, even if it's entertaining, this.
Well,
I'm just thinking of those pig. You know, the image of the pig eye zoomed up close. It's like,
Yeah,
oh yeah,
it's like this is a pig on a truck to go to the slaughterhouse.
Yeah. So my long-winded point was just that I think the book plays with the idea that like if there's a moss that can kill you and take over your body, like maybe that's as valid as you. But then it also plays with the idea of like human level consciousness taking over the subjectivity of lower creatures and like what that would mean. So it clearly views human subjectivity as like unique and interesting.
It cordyceps human consciousness, in other words.
Yeah, but in the movie, I think that's all explored a little bit less. But I don't know,
because the creature clearly has the entity, the Shimmer, clearly has a form of higher intelligence and consciousness in the movie. Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing that I wanted to mention, I don't know if this is right to mention, but it's very interesting what gets left out of the movie. So, like, I don't know how you would have represented this on screen, but like one of the central antagonists of the book is there's a creature in the lighthouse. You know, like in the movie, in the lighthouse, there's a hole in the bottom of the lighthouse, and she crawls down, and that's where she originally meets like the sort of.
Well, that's a powerful metaphor. That's like the cosmic birth. That's going through the cosmic yoni into a new environment. That's tunneling under the shadow self, to use a Jungian metaphor.
No, totally. But in the book, there is like a physical slug under there called the Crawler, and it is writing versions of biblical scripture on the wall. Like
a slug man.
Yeah, there's a slug man called the Crawler, and actually, I'll pull up. You guys can talk, but I'll pull up what the Crawler writes on the wall because it's extremely evocative.
That's very interesting because there's very powerful biblical metaphors around worms and parasites being a sort of vector of a malevolent spirit. And there's even that famous 4chan post about worms and certain sexualities.
Well, real quick, Gio, longtime listeners of the Granite Mountain Movie Club will remember the Slug Man. That was one of
we've talked about the Slug Man before.
The Slug Man makes another appearance.
Can I do the other religious similarities? Because the Shimmer almost looks like water, and they have to cross into it, and then when they do, their bodies are changed, and then when they come out, they're a new man, a new woman. The kind of inside the Shimmer is like an Eden. There's also these strong male-female marriage characters that are kind of changed by going into this garden. But yeah, it is an inversion. That's what I was going to say. It's more of like an as above, so below, almost like a satanic.
It's an inverted
baptism.
Edenic image. Yeah.
I can't believe
I have two amazing quotes for you here. First, here's the description of the Crawler. The Crawler is a mutated human that writes biblical-sounding nonsense on the walls of the tower using organic fungi ink. And then here's the first thing it writes in the book. Where lies the strangling fruit that came from the hand of the sinner? I shall bring forth the seeds of the dead to share with the worms that gather in the darkness and surround the world with the power of their lives, while from the dimlit halls of other places forms that never were and never could be writhe for the impatience of the few who never saw what could have been. In the black water with the sun shining at midnight, those fruit shall come ripe, and in the darkness of that which is golden shall split open to reveal the revelation of the fatal softness in the earth. And it goes on like that for a while.
That's direct biblical eschatology.
Did you guys read Goosebumps?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
There's
R.L.
th-
Stein core.
there's an R.L. Stein Goosebumps with with a slug man. Like I can't remember the name. It's like a giant slug. Let me see if
I just want him to go on a dating show. Is all.
I can't remember. Anyway, in that one, all the kids got like trapped in the Slugman's like theme park, and they had to wash him all the time. That was like their punishment.
No, but that's like direct biblical imagery though. Like
Yeah.
that's sort of like the poison fruit. But you were saying about like at different levels of environmentalism. Like there is that sort of like environmental thought that crosses over into transhumanism, crosses over into philosophy of mind. Now, I particularly, I don't have any love for people like the Chamberlains or Daniel Dennett or people that think that, consciousness is like hardwired or whatever, or computational, or like some kind of illusion or eidolon that we inhabit, that the norm is unconsciousness. I think like, panpsychism is pretty interesting, but there is like a more positive, more spiritualized view of the environment that people like Derek Jensen and even to an extent Petty Linkola would embody, where everything is conscious in a certain way. And I think like that probably is a better metaphor for this, at least the movie film adaptation of of Shimmer in Annihilation. Whereas like the sort of like almost to our interpretation like nihilistic view of sort of consciousness being an aberration that will soon be extinguished, and if there is some kind of like unconscious fungal or viral entity that can be more replicatable, that can conquer every space and every environment, that actually that's like no different than say the sort of like popular image of like the Ray Kurzweil AI transhumanism. That's sort of
No,
like,
I think you're totally right, and I actually think Alex Garland. I think there's a number of ways in which it seems like Garland had deep insights into the book, even if he only read it once, and even brought things that are in the book but not fully realized are more fully realized in the movie. Because I think what I like about the book and the movie is like it's not contemptuous of human consciousness, but it's also not dismissive of the idea that other forms of life could
Yeah.
have like an equally valid or interesting, like I think the creature that comes to imitate Natalie Portman and ultimately literally becomes like a clone of her. I don't think the movie is saying like this is superior to a human or this is inferior to a human. I think it's just saying like it's almost like, what if there was a thing that was as intelligent as a human,
us, yeah.
but had the subjectivity of like an ant colony, where sort of its its highest aspiration was to imitate something directly or just copy something. And I think that's a very interesting idea.
There's
but
no individuated consciousness, the way that Jung described early, more primitive tribes, that they live through a collective dream. And there's like
right, but I
collectivism,
think I think the reason the book and the movie are good is they're not taking like a contemptuous environmentalist view where it's like, oh, the collective unconscious of animals is just and human individuated consciousness is evil. It's actually just saying like, what would it be like in a horror sense if you met a creature as advanced as you, but had the subjectivity of a plant or a fish or a bug.
Part of it too is like the Jurassic
like
Park
accessing the Chinese hive mind.
Yeah, the Jurassic Park life
Yeah.
finds a way thing.
Right. What would it be like to go to Bombay?
No, but it's funny you mentioned Jurassic Park, Grant, because there is that great line in the second movie. Because again, I was a Jurassic Park kid, right? There was a Julianne Moore's environmental shitlib character where my favorite character is Roland Tembo, and she says to Roland Tembo, she says to Roland Tembo, so you mean to tell me that a creature that's been reanimated after 2 million years through human will, we've reanimated this creature, your first instinct is to hunt and kill it? And then Roland Tembo goes, I knew a man once who went to Everest. He came back half dead. And they asked him, why did you go up there to die? He goes, I didn't go up there to die. I went up there to live. It's true. That's the Faustian spirit. But also, like, to Cool Fraser's point, like, think of it. That is the inversion of the Edenic metaphor, because now the Eve, or actually the Lilith character of the bitchy girl boss, Natalie Portman, who is supporting the evil genocide of the Palestinians.
Yes.
There's a genocide going on. Natalie Portman, now she becomes the Eve character is actually the harbinger of the of the fruit of knowledge of good and evil. I guess she is in the Bible, but she's rather the character that Adam was supposed to be in a weird way.
Well, and also she, instead of being the beginning of life, the source of life, she's the end of human life, kind of.
Yes.
Or at least that's
Natalie
implied.
Portman supporting the genocide of the Palestinians.
Yes.
Exactly.
And the shimmer is the wall separating Gaza.
Yeah. And the Israelis. Yeah, exactly.
Garland is really interested in this, like, inverted Adam and Eve thing. Because I just covered Ex Machina.
Right.
And in that one, and that movie ends with a sort of devious Eve figure who leaves her garden
upon the world.
Yeah, and she leaves her garden, through sin alone, which is one of the most, like, broken parts of it. And in this one as well, like, if you remember, her husband's name, by the way, which we haven't gotten into, his name is Cain. But Cain goes into the Shimmer. I mean, presumably he had some sort of choice. Maybe he didn't, but he goes into the Shimmer sort of knowing that she was having an affair. So it was like woman's sin once again had sort of broken their world.
You mean women's sin fundamentally distorts the world order? I mean, that never happens.
Yeah. And once again,
the male feminist take.
Yeah, again,
Ex Machina is about Emma Emhoff, right?
Yeah,
I think I read that online.
Well, once again, Annihilation features a woman leaving alone. Like, it's this thing he's trying to work out, I guess.
Well, no, because a lot of Garland films, with the exception of 28 Days Later, because that's I don't know, I guess, like, that also has male feminist vibes because of that one disturbing scene where Major Wesley, played by Christopher Elkinson, says, "Jim, I promised them women." And it's like, what? What do you mean? Oh, you mean rape? Okay. So, yeah, Jim, I promised you women. But a lot of Alex Garland, to get serious for a moment, a lot of Alex Garland films are sort of women are traumatized, but they're left alone in a world without their source of trauma, in a sort of quietism. Now, I don't know if the recent fucking terrible Civil War movie was the same. I guess it's like a female girl boss journalist being left alone in her silence. But that seems to be a Garland trope of, like, the powerful Eve figure lives through her trauma, and now she's sustaining it by entering into an unknown that gives her room for a form of female quietism that is often not provided by the world of patriarchal male authority.
Yeah,
there's such an advanced, like, Longhouse reading of Civil War, because it's like there's like a pseudo lesbian and a young lesbian who's teaching the younger lesbian how to be a girl boss, and, like, her final graduation to being a girl boss is not even caring that her mentor is getting shot and killed, but just, like, taking pictures of her dying,
like all lesbian relationships,
which is her job.
Like most lesbian relationships.
I suspect that Garland is like a crypto misogynist. I think in interviews and stuff he'll talk, he'll say the right things, but I think he's like Ari Aster, that guy as well. That guy is as well as a misogynist. But he's scared of sort of admitting it, so he has to just launder it.
He has to, like,
is it some sort of horseshoe theory?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's
all male.
Well, no, there's definitely.
Yeah,
I mean, you guys have probably all seen, like, Zizek's, like, Pervert's Guide to Cinema, but there definitely is a thing going on in Hollywood right now of, like, I don't know, maybe members of a certain monotheistic faith just, like, putting their perverse visions on screen and then just being like, yeah, I just really wanted to explore this disgusting thing that exists in our culture. And
Obsessed with these sexual perversions, to
people
quote
being
Danny.
like, but are you interested in it? It's like, no, not at all. I'm so upset that I have to explore this in my art, but I have to put it on trial for the culture.
It's sort of like Kara Walker in her artwork exploring like the sexualized trauma of slaves in the Americas. It's like she's dated only white and Jewish men, so it's like that weird like race play type of sex lectic going on. But no, I think like that's true because, for example, like, I mean, Zizek would say this, but also, like, again, to mention the environmentalist Derek Jensen, he often says this, and of course he's gotten into trouble recently for going hard against the Impossibles, the Beyonds, you know what I mean? He he said, like, something that presents itself as a form of liberation, especially towards women, is actually a form of pseudo-liberation and actually is a form of oppression. And he says the trans rights movement is that writ large because it's essentially an invasion of female spaces by men, but we have to pretend that it's opening up a space for the feminine when actually the feminine is taking a back burner to the autistic male mind that wants to paraphilically pervert the image of the woman and the imago Dei of the feminine. So I think like you could say that something that's presented as a very male feminist, like women's liberatory film, in actuality hides a very dark and secret perversity towards that Eve figure, towards her ultimately assimilation into an alien order that isn't patriarchal, but nevertheless is almost in some ways more oppressive and more alien and more debasing. So fuck,
No,
man, what a great interpretation of this film. Holy shit.
I agree.
I surprised myself.
I agree totally, Gio, but I also think, to back up your point, I don't know if I want to credit Garland or Oscar Isaac with this, but to me, the most amazing scene in this film, and it's a very brief scene, but it contains so much like depth of male experience, is when Oscar Isaac cuts open the other guy's stomach, and then he has sort of like moving creatures in his guts, and Oscar Isaac sort of puts his hand under the thing to show its movement, like against his still hand. But like, it's not only an aesthetically amazing scene, but it's incredible in this movie because the whole time the women are exploring Area X, they're very cold with each other.
Yeah.
None of them trust each other. And then they find this video, and you see all the men are like shirtless, literally touching each other.
Like hugging each other.
Yeah, Oscar Isaac looks into his fellow soldier's eyes, and he's like, I'm going to cut you open right now.
He gives him a little kiss on the forehead.
Yeah, and the guy's like, no problem, bro. I love you. Oscar Isaac's like, I love you too. Let's do this science experiment. And like the contrast between that very brief moment of the male interaction, which to my mind plays very realistic, like as a scene of sort of men in war, like one man among a squad being like, okay, essentially you have to kill me to figure something out. But even as that's happening, they're all still like very much in it together. And the women in the movie are not like that at all.
They're frigid girl bosses.
They're all scheming against each other the whole. So definitely from that scene, which I think is my favorite.
And they're all
scene
like
in the
multiracial. They're all like neoliberal kitsch multiracial women as well.
Right. That scene, by the way, is not in the book at all. So like that is from Garland's mind.
The pretty Swedish one, who I think might be the only one who's a mother in the movie, she seems sweet. She was nice to everyone.
Yeah, they should have included Zazie Beetz in the cast. That would
yeah, she could have been.
Was that a Jennifer Jason Leigh's character or no?
Yeah, Jennifer Jason Leigh was the doctor, the psychologist or whatever.
Man, talk about femcel hot back in the 90s. That's like, like that's the archetype of femcel hot. No, but I mean, like, that's a great thing because they say, like, in situations of war, a lot of touring bands talk about that, where you sort of adopt a non-homosexual sort of fealty towards men in times of great stress or in times of closeness. And in warfare in particular, they're sort of like
Yeah,
they
or like
operate as
hosting a
family.
podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
no, but in times of great significance and where the usual order of things are disrupted, you sort of like take on that role towards the other men. But and it's sort of like it's a non-sexual form of grafting onto those familiar roles in times of in times of exception, let's say. So yeah, I think that's totally key. But it's funny how they are depicted as like these girl bosses that don't really have that. Maybe it's because they're sort of living through their trauma and they all have their own baggage, and it's like women are tired sort of deal. So yeah.
Yeah, when they're sitting down like at the table and they're sort of all
Should we
giving
form
the
a perimeter? I don't
giving
know.
giving the
yeah.
rundown of like their mental illnesses. It reminded me of the meme format. It's like I'm building a team, and it's like crazy person, crazy person, crazy person.
So you're dying of cancer. You were raped. You're cheating on your husband. It's okay. Like let's have name tags, and yeah, that's like
This is sort of like a digression, but I always think it's funny in movies when movies create this scenario very frequently that I don't know if it exists in life, where there's like a very important mission, but for story specific reasons only fuck ups can get deployed on the mission. And then the characters will be like, yeah, I'm the best sniper there ever was, but why am I not a senator now? Because I got divorced. So I'm disgraced. So all I can do is do this like Siberian anti-alien mission. And
a motley crew of misfits and losers. Yeah.
Yes, and I always think like, I don't think our institutions are full of people who like haven't been divorced or something. Like, I don't think that's how it works. It's like, yes, I went to Harvard, but then I got fired from a job. So now I can only fight aliens in the jungle.
Well, as we speak, RFK is working on a deal to become like Attorney General or something.
Yeah.
Let's see. I kill my father.
Wait, didn't he kill a bear in the woods?
Yeah, he left in Central Park.
Yes, just like Annihilation.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, Arturo actually said something to me recently that I
wait. The bear starts talking like RFK.
Yeah, Arturo, who fans of the show will know, he was like, I don't know if I have too much baggage to be successful or not enough. And I was like, now you're thinking like a winner. You need to like,
you need enough,
kill your wife.
Yeah.
You need enough that various little things you do along the way don't stand out. But
yeah,
if
like
you're like
William Burroughs killing his wife.
Yeah.
You mean Arturo from Night Owls?
Yeah.
No, well, RFK, like, by the way, Sirhan did not do it, by the way. He was like a fall guy. But
breaking news here on Granite Mountain.
And while I'm at it, by the way, it was Maxwell Yerrick that tried to kill Trump. Now this other fucking nerd they got, this nerdy kid. It was Maxwell Yerrick. But anyways, no, it's funny. That was like that one line that it was one Night Owls. It wasn't Yoshi. It wasn't Arturo. It was Yoshi that said, I feel like every guy who watched White Chicks in the theater died in Operation Racky.
That's for the people at home. That's Kevin Nash mukbang that you're talking about these days.
Yeah, Kevin Nash.
Also known as HIV immigrant or whatever.
The best was the one troll account he had was it was right when he died too. It was the O.J. Simpson Innocence Project. That was the best. But yeah, Arturo comes out with bangers too. Like I remember the one, it was all these elections in Europe happened. It was right after the Gaza invasion. He's like, well, I guess like they were trying to stealth. I can't say the metaphor of the government. 3-letter one. I can't say it. But anyways, it was a good observation. They tried to stealth. Let's move on. That's never mind. Yeah, but no, like I totally think that it like this film does differentiate from a lot of sci-fi films that are very much like shoot 'em up, alien, they're trying to invade us. or like, did anyone? Nobody remembers this fucking film. I mentioned this on another podcast, but nobody remembers it. Do you remember the Donald? He died recently too. Do you remember the Donald Sutherland film? I think it was called Virus, where
Yes.
they were like going on a ship and it was filled with like alien robots or something like that.
Oh, I vaguely remember this. I googled it. It looks familiar, but I don't recall.
Yeah, it was like this '90s Drek film, but it was pretty good though. Like it was pretty. It reminded me of the same thing, only like it reminded me, and Annihilation sort of reminded me, although in a more overt robotic metaphor, although it still had the space implication. You ever watch the Canadian 90s sci-fi horror film Screamers?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, like no, totally. Like nobody remembers Screamers, but Screamers had such a could have had like a better world building in terms of like a corporatocracy forcing miners to go into radioactive mines, but like it had an amazing backstory. Just that it devolved into the typical like shoot 'em up like survival film, but it was
Gio,
still.
have you seen the Anderson Cooper Donald Sutherland interview?
I've never seen that one.
It's incredible because he's just like, well, Donald, you've had an amazing life. You've been famous for 60 years. How do you feel? And Donald Sutherland's just like, well, when I was 12, my mom told me I was ugly, and that's haunted me my entire life, and I've never been happy.
Oh man, that's crazy. What is Anderson
Meanwhile,
Cooper doing now?
Kiefer is just...
This concludes the free preview. To hear the full episode, please visit the Granite Mountain Substack and subscribe to the Premium XL Prestige Sigma bonus stream.